Hi, if you're just joining us, we're just giving it a moment for everyone to join. Hello to those just joining. We'll begin in a minute. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome and good evening. Thanks for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Maddie Walters, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm pleased to introduce this virtual event with Michael Sandell, presenting his new book, The Tyranny of Merit, in conversation with Preet Bharara. Through virtual events like tonight, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to you and others in our community during these challenging times. Every week, we're here hosting events on our Zoom, and as always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our weekly email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time tonight, go to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as we can. In the chat box during this presentation, you'll see a link to purchase tonight's book online. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you for your support during this trying time for community spaces like your local bookstores. You will also find a link to donate in the chat box. Your purchases and contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers here at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these last few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Michael Sandell teaches political philosophy at Harvard University, and he has sought to extend the reach of philosophy beyond academics. His Justice course at Harvard was the first to be made freely available online and has since been viewed by tens of millions worldwide. He has also led series on BBC Radio and lectured for TED Talk. His previous books include the international bestsellers, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, and Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? Preet Bharara served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York from 2009 to 2017, where he oversaw the investigation and litigation of all criminal and civil cases and supervised an office of more than 200 assistant U.S. attorneys. In 2017, he joined the NYU School of Law faculty as a distinguished scholar in residence. He is the host of Cafes Stay Tuned with Preet, and his previous work includes the New York Times bestseller, Doing Justice. Tonight, they'll be discussing Michael's new book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of Common Good, which was praised by Tara Westover, author of Educated, as astute, insightful, and empathetic. This book is just what we need right now. I'm so pleased to turn things over to tonight's speakers. Michael and Preet, the digital podium is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to the Harvard Bookstore. Thank you to Professor Michael Sandell, who was very well introduced. I'll just add, for those of you who don't realize and appreciate, Michael Sandell was my professor, and I took that justice course and paid full market value for it. I don't have the benefit of taking it for free, and it's been very influential in my life. The book I wrote has the word justice in it also, and a lot of that traces back to learning at the feet of Michael Sandell. So, Professor, welcome. Can I start with a question that is usually easy, but is a little more complicated in these times? How are you? And how is the new teaching season?
Well, thank you for asking, Preet. But first of all, let me thank you for joining me in this conversation. It's really an honor for me. And I hope I have only the same request I make every time we meet for occasions like this, which is you got to stop calling me professor.
Okay, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for me, but I will.
Right.
Professor Michael, I will do my best.
Okay. But as for the term has begun here at Harvard. We're teaching all courses remotely this semester, although some students, first-year students, are present physically. All the courses are online. We are adapting, I'd say, surprisingly well so far. The students seem very engaged. So far, so good, Preet.
As I said to you before we came on, I'm very proud of my alma mater. So far, there have been no expulsions, to my knowledge.
Right.
That's happened in some other places. So I have in my hands your book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good. And you can, as you can see, I have not only read it, I've written in it, I've thought about it, I have Post-its in it, I have even blurbed the book myself. So for what it's worth for folks, I think it's an incredibly important, insightful work, and let's start talking about it. So before we get into the tyranny part of it, I thought we'd start with the merit part of it.
Right.
And maybe explain for folks, so we're using the same terminology and we're defining terms. When you talk about merit and meritocracy, what is it that you mean by that? And what is it you think that the average American understands that to be?
Right. It's a great question, Preet, to begin with, because merit, as we commonly use the term, is a good thing, even an ideal. Awarding jobs and social positions on the basis of merit without regard to class background or race or gender, that's a good thing. And so how can merit be a tyranny? The argument of the book is that merit has come to be a tyranny in recent decades, as the divide between winners and losers has deepened, polarizing our politics, driving us apart. And the problem is not only the deepening inequality of income and wealth. We're well familiar with that. The problem has to do with the changing attitudes towards success and failure that have accompanied the deepening inequality. Those who've landed on top during the decades of globalization have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and by implication, those who've been left behind must be responsible for their fate too. And so this sets up, I call it meritocratic hubris among the successful.
Right.
And it generates humiliation among those who are left behind and looked down upon. And that's when merit becomes a tyrant.
Can we talk a little bit about how we got to this point? The idea of merit and desert and meritocracy obviously is not new. It's a timeless concept and notion.
Right.
But as you point out in the book, we kind of have made it more of a cathedral of late than it was some time ago. What's the reason for that? And explain this notion you talk about in the book, the rhetoric of rising.
Yeah. The rhetoric of rising is perhaps the most familiar trope or slogan of our politics in recent decades, among Democrats and Republicans alike. If you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able in America to rise as far as your effort and talents will take you. How often have we heard this slogan on the campaign trail?
By both sides, by all the parties. That's something on which they tend to agree.
Right. It's uncontroversial, which may be why politicians love it so much.
Right.
Politicians love seemingly uncontroversial pronouncements, especially if they're uplifting, as this one, the rhetoric of rising, seems to be. In fact, it's so familiar, Preet, that it seems almost to define the American dream itself, this rhetoric of rising. I was surprised when I did the research for this book, and now you can do searches of presidential rhetoric, and other and uses of other terms. And I found that this phrase, the rhetoric of rising, rising as far as your effort and talent will take you, this is a relatively new thing. It's a product in our public discourse. It's a prominent feature of really only the last 4 decades. It really comes in with Ronald Reagan. And then it's taken up by Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And it becomes almost a mantra. And so the relative novelty of this seemingly obvious, uncontroversial, familiar, uplifting phrase, that I found interesting and in need of explanation. And I have an account both of why it became prominent and why, by 2016, it had lost its capacity to inspire.
So what are those accounts?
Okay.
In brief.
Well, in brief, this was the response of mainstream center-right and center-left political parties to the deepening inequality of the age of market-driven globalization. Instead of contending with that inequality head-on by trying to figure out how to restructure the economy, they offered a different solution: individual upward mobility through higher education. That was the response that mainstream parties and politicians offered to the rising inequality, the rhetoric of rising. We don't have to worry so much about the deepening inequality because no one is consigned to the class of his or her birth. If you get a college degree, you too can rise. You can make it if you try. This was Barack Obama's version of the rhetoric of rising. He used it, I found, over 140 times in speeches taken from a pop song.
So there's an inherent paradox there, right? Because you're saying that some of this rhetoric and this positioning was in response to rising inequality.
Right.
It seems like implicit in this slogan, this idea, is that there is equality of opportunity. In other words, it only works in a society in which merit actually wins the day. And then we'll get to why that's not even good enough in a moment.
Right.
So how do you get away with this rhetorical sleight of hand for decades in a country full of smart people?
Well, it's a subtle thing, Preet, the slide between saying we should aspire to a society where chances are truly equal and where everyone can have a chance to rise regardless of background. The aspirational version, we're working toward it. We want to bring it about. There's a slide between that aspirational version and stating it as a fact, as a feature of American life. In America, you can make it if you try. It's a declaration of an achievement of the great promise of America. And political rhetoric is this way. It's not that the politicians were deliberately being slippery in going back and forth between the aspirational account and the descriptive version. It's that political rhetoric of this kind is like that. It moves back and forth between fact and hope, blurring the two. And when it turned out, especially by the 2000s, that it actually wasn't very easy to rise one generation to the next in America. Harder to do it here than in many countries in Europe and then in Canada. This generated a certain unease, a certain disaffection, a certain cynicism even before we get to the dark side of the meritocratic promise, which gets to the point you were mentioning earlier about the problems with this vision, even if opportunities were truly equal.
Part of the reason the rhetoric seemingly works is that it's not the case that there's complete immobility. There's just not as much mobility as the ideal would like you to believe. Parents can always look at their kids in America and say,
right,
look at this person, came up from poverty, was an orphan,
yeah,
and became the CEO of a company. Or look at this athlete who came from nothing and is
Right.
now a multimillionaire and is the home run slugger of history books.
Right.
There's always a few examples. And in your view, is that inspiring when parents tell their children, you can grow up and be a billionaire too, you can grow up and be president too? Or is that somehow not a good thing because the likelihood of that is so low, and it causes, notwithstanding the few examples of that kind of outsized success and uncommon success, but the vast majority of people are not going to live up to that expectation, even though they're being sold that slogan?
It can be inspiring, provided it's not taken to be the primary way of dealing with inequality. We have a long tradition in this country of saying, in a somewhat self-satisfied way, we don't need to worry as much about inequalities of income and wealth as those European countries, because here in America, you can rise. You're not stuck in the class of your birth. Whereas in old Europe, this was our image. In old class-bound Europe, they worry more about inequality. They have more generous welfare state because they have less mobility than we do. That was the comforting conventional wisdom that we told ourselves about equality and mobility, and what we thought was the trade-off between them for a long time. But now the trade-off actually works the other way. Societies that have a greater measure of equality, stronger social safety nets, are actually the places where there is more upward mobility, one generation to the next, than in societies like ours with relatively thin social safety nets and with greater inequality. So that consoling thought is an indulgence that no longer fits the facts on the ground.
I was struck by something else in your book that speaks to differences between the United States and some European countries. And you recite the following figure. In America, the extent to which people think hard work is, quote, very important to getting ahead in life. In America, 74% of people think that is right. And in France, only 25% of people think it's very important to getting ahead in life that you work hard.
Right.
Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And why is there such a huge discrepancy? Isn't hard work good and relevant?
Hard work is a good thing. The question is whether hard work is crowned with success and reward and honor. It's interesting, in that same survey in Germany, only around half has said that hard work is the key to success. And Germany is known to be a place also that has quite a strong work ethic. So what this question really tests, I think, part of what it tests, is whether people believe there's a lot of luck in life in determining who lands on top. And as inequality has deepened, and as we have come to assume that if we're successful, it must be our own doing, we tend to underestimate the role of luck in life. We tend, if we believe success is our due, if we're flourishing and believe we deserve it, there is a tendency to forget the luck and good fortune that helped us on our way. And also the accident, contingency, and bad luck that may account for those who struggle. And this reinforces, forgetting the role of luck can reinforce meritocratic hubris, can reinforce the looking down on those who somehow didn't manage to get a college degree and who struggle. And it can make it hard to picture ourselves in other people's shoes. And so in this way, the meritocratic hubris of elites that has gathered force in recent decades is corrosive of the common good, because it narrows our moral imagination, our sense of sympathy and solidarity and identification with those less fortunate, less credentialed than us.
I've been, people may not realize that the most recent issue of the podcast episode of the podcast is me interviewing Michael Sandell. And since that interview, another anecdote came to mind, and I forgot to ask you about it, so I'll ask you about it here. A person I know who runs a company, consulting company, said to me not too long ago that when they hire somebody, and they hire, it's an important place, and they may be credentialist or not, and we'll get to the hubris of credentialism in a moment, because you talked about that as well. And he says when they're planning to hire someone to a position, any position, important or otherwise, that they always ask the applicant, do you believe you got to where you are because of luck or something else? And what was interesting was not the fact that they asked the question, but how they weighted the answer.
Right.
And they said, to the extent that someone mostly credits themselves and hard work and merit, they don't like to hire such people. And they prefer to hire the person who has a healthy appreciation of how much luck has played a role in their rise. What do you make of that as a sort of a hiring consideration?
It's interesting. I'd not thought of it as a hiring consideration. I would see it, first of all, as a kind of test of character. Whether being of good character and having sufficient humility to recognize the role that luck plays in success, whether that makes one better at certain kinds of jobs and social roles, it's an interesting question. It might depend on the social role, but thinking of one in particular, I think it's terribly important. And that's the role of governing, or serving as a representative or a public official in a democratic society. I think one of the great prices we've paid for the meritocratic hubris of elites in recent decades is that governing elites have lost contact with a large swath of their fellow citizens. And that clearly makes them less effective at governing a democratic society. In fact, I think one of the mistakes that we've made, that governing elites have made, has been to confuse, to understand the merit of governing well in terms of having technocratic expertise. This is a great mistake, because the best and the brightest in technocratic terms, or in credentialist terms, may have little political judgment, may have little sense of identification with people from all walks of life. And these are virtues, civic virtues, that touch on qualities of character that are essential to governing effectively in a democratic society. And one of the reasons I think governing elites have done such a poor job on the whole over the past 3 or 4 decades is the narrowing of the merit seen as relevant to governing to technocratic expertise. The humility that can come from an appreciation of luck, that points toward more generous virtues and a greater tendency, I think, to identify with the good of the whole.
I'm going to go back to what it is we tell children. And I realize some of these questions may sound like it's a parenting class,
No.
but to the extent that part of the enterprise here, and I think it is part of your enterprise,
Right.
is to develop citizens who are good citizens and of good character.
Yeah.
It strikes me, it's one thing at some point in life, in adulthood, for someone to appreciate the fact that you got to where you got, in part because you worked hard, and in part because of efforts that you have made.
Right.
But a lot of it is luck, and that's great. My question is, it gets very complicated in my head. At the beginning of life, when you're trying to inculcate in a child, whether you're a teacher or a parent, to say, here's how you should think about life going forward. On the one hand, we tend to say, particularly in this country,
Right.
you work hard, you can go as far as your talents carry you.
Right.
Parents and teachers are also guilty of that rhetoric of rising every single day.
Right.
But it would seem odd to say, as a matter of messaging to a young person, and I haven't worked all this out in my head yet,
Right.
to say, listen, you know what? You can work as hard as you want. Life is terrible. Life is unfair. And
Right.
unless you have some good luck and charm that charms your life, all this hard work is not going to amount to a hill of beans,
Right.
which is a weird incentivizing message to send a child. Can you solve that for me?
Right. I love the way of framing that you framed it, Preet, because I think testing these messages, these teachings, really, from the standpoint of a parent, I think is a telling way of testing them. So let me see if I can respond to the competing messages that parents might give. I think you're right, Preet, that parents and teachers do and should inculcate conscientious effort and a strong work ethic among students, above all, because that carries with it a sense of human agency. It teaches young people that they can make a difference in their lives and ultimately in the world. And that's a good thing. We don't want to raise young people or to cultivate citizens who are world weary and cynical and believe it's all down to chance and nothing I do will make a difference. So a sense of responsibility and a sense of human agency, the capacity to shape one's circumstance and that of the society, that's important, that's laudable, noble even, up to a point.
I was waiting for that.
Up to a point.
It's always up to a point with you.
Because beyond a certain point, the ideal of human agency that invites young people or citizens to think of themselves as entirely self-made and self-sufficient, a kind of unfettered human agency, untainted by fate, luck, chance, unpredictability. That might seem the ultimate expression, really of an exhilarating vision of human agency, that our fate is in our hands. Not only would that be misleading to human experience, but it would also be, in a way, intoxicating. It would cultivate a faith, a belief that one's success is one's own doing. And that quickly generates the hubris that highlights the dark side of meritocracy. But you're right to trace
the failure is also the fault of the person who has failed.
Yes, both. It seems and to there's another, if I could just add one other damaging effect, that too thoroughgoing a reliance, a cultivation of effort and striving can inflict. Beyond the humiliation and sense of defeat that this world picture inflicts on those who don't flourish, it's also carried to an extreme, damaging to the winners. And I've begun to see this in my students. They've gone through a teenage career, and often it begins before the teenage years, of a kind of stress-strewn, high-pressure, meritocratic gauntlet, emphasizing achievement, prepping for the SAT, doing a multitude of extracurriculars, the better to impress admissions committees. All of the music lessons and sports activities and good works in distant lands that are part of the resume building that is often overseen by high-paid college consultants. Now, you could say, and it would be true, they get an unfair edge over kids whose parents can't afford all that help. That's true. It's unfair. but it also inflicts a psychic and emotional toll on the winners, on those who prevail, because they become so accustomed to hoop jumping and to pleasing parents and teachers and coaches and admissions committees, so accustomed to gathering credentials for instrumental purposes. By the time they arrive in university, many of them struggle with mental health, but even those who don't have little space to step back and reflect on what's worth caring about, what fields of study they would really ignite their passions. In short, they have little time for the actual learning. They're still jumping through hoops and competing to join clubs and building their resume and networking for the next opportunity. So the tyranny of merit exerts itself with regard to those who are left out, but it also exacts a toll on the young people who triumph, and I worry about them too.
Those tolls are not equal.
They're not equal.
Right.
They're not equal, but it is a striking feature of tyranny that it points in both directions, and this is true. Going all the way back to Plato, Plato said that tyrants inflict injustice on the victims, those whom they lorded over. But Plato taught the tyrant, because his soul is disordered, the tyrant is himself unhappy. And that teaching of Plato about the double effects of tyranny is eerily reenacted by the tyranny of merit that we have created with the credentialism of our day. What do you think about that, Preet?
I think that's a terrific, wonderful answer.
Without equating the two.
No, but it is also useful, I think, in argument that you're making, if you want change, to get the people who are the benefactors here to understand there's a cost for them too.
Right.
People usually don't do. So I think I think it makes sense. I think it's wise, and I think it's also effective. In listening to you talk about the answer to the question about what we should tell young people, seems to me, just to make a comment and then ask you about something else, we shouldn't only be talking to them about them, right? I posed the question maybe not as broadly as I should have, insofar as we're talking about what does an educator, a parent, a teacher say to a particular child, and that may give them the wrong message about how far they can go on their own talents and hard work. But at the same time, we also should be explaining to them empathy and to look around at their classmates and their friends and their neighbors,
right,
and say, what do you think of those folks who don't have as big a house, or don't have as good grades, or don't have as fancy a car, and explain to them that that's not always the flip side of the meritocratic coin.
Right.
There's some luck involved in how you got to where you are. You get to have this kind of life because your mother and father, have a certain kind of job and certain kinds of skills, and don't judge other people starting from a young age. You teach this so they don't get the hubris when they get older, and maybe that's part of the solution.
Right.
I want to ask you this question as you sit as a tenured professor at Harvard College in one of the most elite, you said elite a few times. We both might consider ourselves to be included in that category. In one of the great university towns in the country, if not the world. And you write in the book, quote, one of the most galling features of meritocratic hubris is its credentialism. What is that? Why is it bad? And is it a little bit odd to make that point from the perch that you're sitting in?
Well, first let me say why I think it's the case, and then others can judge for themselves whether I should be disqualified for making this observation. Credentialism is the tendency in our, credentialism is what results from the harsh ethic of success, the dark side of meritocracy. Going back to the Rhetoric of Rising we were discussing at the beginning, Preet, an important part of that rhetoric is You can compete and win. You too can rise through mobility if you get a university degree. What those politicians and parties missed who offered that promise, that seemingly inspiring promise, was the insult embedded in it. The insult was, if you don't go to college, and if you aren't flourishing in the new economy, your failure is your fault. And what it distracted, what this rhetoric of rising did was to distract these parties and these politicians from a different, more expansive, generous agenda, focused on how to make life better for everyone, credentialed or not. And what it forgets, and what we can easily forget, is that most American adults don't have a four-year college degree. Nearly 2/3 don't. That's true in this country. It's true in Britain. It's true in most European countries. So it's folly to create an economy that sets as a condition of dignified work and a decent life a four-year university degree. It also leads us woefully to underinvest in forms of learning, the forms of learning where most people equip themselves to contribute to the economy, including two-year community colleges, including vocational and technical training. Not only do we woefully underinvest in those forms of learning, we also depreciate them in terms of social honor and recognition. The hierarchy of prestige, it's more pronounced in America than in Europe, but the hierarchy of prestige between brand name four-year universities and state colleges, two-year community colleges, and vocational and technical training tracks is vast. And we should begin to rethink that, because apart from the investments, the values, the attitudes that accompany that hierarchy of esteem contribute to, are an instance of the credentialism that disparages those who lack a four-year college degree, and it diminishes our esteem, our recognition of the importance of the work they do.
And by the way, that's most people in America.
That's most people.
And it also may explain some politics in recent times, as you say in the book, and as other people have observed. One of the greatest discrepancies in whether or not someone is a Trump voter versus a Hillary Clinton voter or a Joe Biden voter is whether or not they have a four-year college degree.
That's right.
The greatest gulfs we have in politics, more than men or women, more than black or white, more than almost anything else.
Well, certainly more than even than income. And this is a reversal. It used to be that college-educated voters voted Republicans, and Democrats drew great strength from blue-collar and middle-class voters, many of whom did not have a four-year college degree. That's changed in just the direction that you've described. And what's striking is that it's changed in this country for the Democratic Party. It's changed for the Labour Party in Britain, which increasingly is also the party of the professional, well-educated classes. In the Brexit vote, overwhelmingly, those without a four-year college degree voted for Brexit. Those with advanced degrees overwhelmingly voted against Brexit. Thomas Piketty has shown that the same reversal in constituencies has occurred in the socialist parties, the left and center left parties in France. And it's all happened during this roughly last 3 decades of market-driven globalization, deepening divide between winners and losers, growing inequality, but also these attitudes towards success, the credentialism, the meritocratic hubris that leaves many working people feeling looked down upon. And when people feel looked down upon, for long enough, when the society seems to inscribe that lack of respect and regard for the work they do, it's predictable that there will be a backlash. And that's exactly what we saw in 2016. And we're still reeling as a result. We're still struggling to understand it. And my concern is, Preet, I don't know if you would agree, that the Democratic Party still has not fully come to terms with this.
I do agree. I think it's a big problem. And I think the persistent nature of support for a particular point of view, Donald Trump's view, and there's no secret in the world about my views of the current president, I think they have not learned. And I think it's actually a key to their continued success in the future, whether or not Donald Trump is defeated this fall. It is a persistent group of folks who feel disenfranchised and humiliated, as you say, and forgotten and not understood. And so, wise politics on both sides, I think, counsels understanding this argument that you make. I want to go in the 20 minutes we have left to some questions from the audience. And so I'm going to state this question and then add something to it, because maybe the fault is mine. An audience member named Rachel writes, merit is not the problem per this discussion. It's structural inequality. So why does Professor Sandell attack merit? And the addition I want to make is, it seems because I think you've been talking about why merit on its own as a concept is flawed and is imperfect. But the fundamental question, it seems to me, that you ask in your book, and let me put it to you this way, and you can answer either version, is, would a perfectly meritocratic society be just? So that's the hypothetical. We talk about why, are we meritocratic? Are we not? Are there problems with it? Are there not? But it seems to me the mental experiment, the thought experiment is, now imagine that you have a pure meritocracy, which everyone says we should aspire to. Is that good enough or not?
All right, let me come to that in a moment, but first to address Rachel's question head on. We've got two problems, not one. I mean, at least two problems in this domain: structural inequality and the meritocratic focus and the meritocratic hubris that prevent the center-left parties from dealing with the structural inequality. Meritocracy, it's important to recognize, and this comes now to the gloss on the question that you've added, Preet. Meritocracy, even a perfect meritocracy, would not solve the problem of structural inequality. In fact, meritocracy is not an alternative to inequality. It's a justification of inequality, not just any inequality, but those inequalities that are thought to result from a level playing field, from equal chances. So this does connect exactly to the question you related it to, Preet. Even a perfect meritocracy would not be a just society, nor would it be one that necessarily would deal with certain structures in the economy that have generated the inequalities. Why would a perfect meritocracy not be a just society?
Well, one reason that I know you talk about is,
go ahead,
the degree to which we are worthy, that we deserve our talents.
Right.
There's a lottery. Some people are born taller. Some people are born shorter. Some people are born with a certain kind of skill. And then, as you will also say, there's a lottery in a given society as with respect to which talents work in the marketplace. And you have a great example that we talked about on the podcast, an athletic example. You have a certain kind of person. I can't remember if you were talking about LeBron.
Yeah, LeBron James.
He happens to have a certain talent, and he happens to succeed at it, and he becomes a multimillionaire and a household name. But on the other hand, you say, and I love this part of the book, there probably exists somewhere someone who is as good at arm wrestling as LeBron is at basketball.
Right.
But they're not equal, and they don't get the same fruits from society.
Right. So the example of LeBron, which I offer in the book, is exactly as you say. First, let's take as given that he practices very hard to cultivate his talents. It's not as if he just ambles out onto the basketball court being gifted. He works hard, but his greatness as a basketball player surely depends in important part on his athletic gifts. And it would be a mistake to say that he morally deserves that those having those gifts in the first place is his own doing. But beyond that, to your second point, Preet, the fact that he lives in a society that loves basketball, that too is not his doing, it's his good luck. If he lived during the Renaissance, they weren't wild about basketball back then.
They weren't?
They needed, I don't think so. They liked fresco painters. They were the ones in demand. So the fact that we live in a society that prizes and rewards the talents and gifts we happen to have, that's not our own doing. That too is our good luck, a matter of contingency, accident, circumstance. And so even a perfect meritocracy that put everyone truly at the same starting point at the race, it could not be said of such a society that the winners of the race deserve the winnings that a market heaps upon them.
So that's a good segue to talk about what we might do to temper the tyranny of meritocracy. And
right.
Another audience member, Arkham, asks, what are some, and I have an addition to this too, what are some alternatives/tweaks to meritocracy that limit the tyranny of pure meritocracy perpetuates? And my addition is this: in reaction to the podcast in which I asked you a lot of these questions, somebody posted on social media a criticism of our conversation. And the criticism was, it's amazing to me how Preet Bharara and Michael Sandel can go on for an hour about meritocracy and what's become of the common good and not make any mention of the idea of the universal basic income. So if you would respond to the question about tweaks, and then if you have a thought on the UBI.
Well, let me begin with the universal basic income. Its appeal, I'm ambivalent about it for the following reasons. The appeal, there's an appeal in decommodifying work and labor, but that would require a sufficiently generous universal basic income, and one that didn't depend for its funding on unraveling the safety net and making cutbacks in public services that are important. So the decommodifying work could be a way of clearing the way to according greater respect to contributions to the economy and to the common good that people make that go largely unrecognized by the market. Part of the problem is that we too often assume that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good. And one of the main arguments of the book is that we need to challenge that assumption. The universal basic income, if it were sufficiently generous, might be one way of helping us call that assumption into question. However, part of the way I think we should redirect our politics, including the politics of the Democratic Party and center-left politics, is to focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on the dignity of work, which requires not only a debate about how better to reward important contributions to the common good that are not adequately rewarded. Witness the essential workers on whom we all rely during the pandemic. But also a political project focused on the dignity of work would also ask, beyond economic reward, about how we can accord greater status, respect, dignity, esteem, and recognition to people who make valuable contributions through the work they do, the families they raise, the communities they serve, but who are not well paid or properly honored and recognized. Now, there will be competing ideas about what it means to really to respect the dignity of work. But it's an ethic. It suggests a debate that draws on an ethic about the contribution to the common good. And my concern with the UBI is that it would essentially concede the obsolescence of work as a way of contributing to the common good. And it worries me, Preet, that many of the proponents of the UBI are people in Silicon Valley who believe they're inventing the robots and devices that will make work obsolete, and they want to essentially buy off the political opposition they anticipate. So if that's the spirit animating the UBI, I'm wary of it.
So your ambivalence would not cause you, would that cause you if you were a legislator or an executive to vote for it, against it, or abstain?
It would depend on how it fit with a broader program to affirm and to renew the dignity of work, and also to invest in and to reinvigorate public spaces and common places of shared democratic citizenship. I think that part of the problem that we're experiencing that contributes to the polarization and that reinforces the credentialist divide is that there are very few class mixing institutions and public places that really bring people together from different walks of life. This too has driven us apart. So I think we need to invest in those public places and facilities within civil society and in the broader public culture. I would put that project ahead in priority of a universal basic income, which, and if we can shore up the dignity of work, and if we can invest in class mixing institutions, and if we can invest in the forms of learning that many working people depend upon, and if we can then still, in addition, do a universal basic income, then I would vote for it, but not otherwise.
I'm not going to put this question to you, but I wonder if the ideal of a city is a class mixing exercise or enterprise. But I want to get to one of the other questions from an attendee.
At its best, yes, but our cities have diverged from that ideal.
And getting worse, and COVID is only exacerbating and undoing, I think, that good, right? Many people in New York City, where I spend a lot of my time, they take the subway because it's the fastest way to get from point A to point B. If you're worth $100 million, or if you are on, you're working at minimum wage. This is an anonymous attendee who asked, you must have expected this question. I'm sure you get this question. Please speak to the role of a university like Harvard in maintaining the tyranny of merit and perpetuating existing inequalities through policies like legacy admissions. What does the university owe the common good? What do those who have benefited owe the rest?
Well, if we look at universities, say the Ivy League universities, it's pretty evident that we don't live up as a society to the meritocratic principles we aspire to. Some economists led by Raj Chetty found, to me, an astounding finding, that if you look at the Ivy League universities as a whole, there are more students from the top 1% than from the bottom half of the country combined. And this is even given the generous financial aid policies and need-blind admissions of most of these institutions. That's an astounding figure. So universities don't live up to the meritocratic promise that the society assigns them, in effect. But so I think legacy admissions are part of it. large part of it is the fact is connected to what we were discussing earlier. Even putting legacy admissions aside, the fact that young people who grow up in affluent families have all kinds of advantages, such that with the SAT, there is a clear correlation between the SAT score and family income. So I think there are lots of things we can do. And as you know, one of the proposals I have in the book will actually raise some hackles, maybe shock some of my colleagues, which has to do with the lottery. Do you want me to talk about that, Preet?
Yeah, why don't you quickly, and I want to get one more question before we have to go.
Okay, well, all right, we'll put that up. We'll leave that as a tantalizing hint for people who, go ahead if you have the other question.
Well, it might be a good question to end on. This is from audience member Peter, who says, one thing I loved about Michael's course and his writings is that he always leaves the end point of the discussion up to us.
Yeah.
What do you do now? And on what grounds do you justify that path? So what is the question Michael would like to leave us with now?
Well, thanks to Peter for that generous but daunting question. I guess the single biggest question, especially for this gathering, is if it's true that much of the polarization that afflicts our public life is related to a sense of grievance and resentment, even of humiliation, among the uncredentialed half, at least half, more than half of our society. What can we do about it? And beyond whatever policy proposals, and I have some in the book, some policy suggestions about how to renew a debate about the dignity of work. What about us? This is the question, Preet, that I suppose I would really like to leave us with. What about those who have flourished in this economy or enjoyed some measure of success? Should we reconsider our own meritocratic hubris, our own tendency, and we all have it, to inhale a little bit too deeply of our success, to remember the luck and good fortune that helped us on our way, to be able to look at those who struggle in this economy and to say, to wonder, there, but for the accident of fortune, or the luck of the draw, or the grace of God go I. Reflecting on the role of luck in life can prompt a certain humility. And this humility, I think, is the civic virtue we need now, especially among those who have landed on top. It can point us, I think, or begin to point us beyond the tyranny of merit toward a less rancorous, more generous public life.
I think we're right on the nose at 6 o'clock. I think that's a good place to end, and a thoughtful question for all of us. I don't know if there's something that I'm supposed to do, wave a wand, but before I go and before we end, I just want to thank Michael Sandell. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your teaching, which I think is a tremendous public service. And thank you for causing people to think a little bit harder than they have before, myself included. And thanks to Harvard Bookstore. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Preet. Before we go, I would like to thank the Harvard Bookstore for organizing this. And I would like really to give a heartfelt thanks to Preet, who not only because he seems now to have given up calling me professor, but also because I consider that over the time in recent years that we've come to know one another, long since those days in Sanders Theater, I really consider him a friend, someone I greatly admire, look up to, and who is really a shining example of the kind of public servant and leader and voice we need more of today. So thank you, Preet.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Thanks, folks.
Thank you both. Huge thank you to Michael and Preet for a wonderful night in. And thanks to all of you out there too for spending your evening with us. You can learn more and purchase tonight's book, The Tyranny of Merit, through the link in the chat box. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Mass., have a good night, keep reading, and please be well.
Thank you. Thanks.